It started like any ordinary night at a small town bar just outside San Diego. The music was loud, the regulars were rowdy, and the bartender was serving drinks like clockwork. Then the door creaked open, and a man walked in, quiet, alone, and unassuming. He wore worn jeans, a plain t-shirt, and a weathered navy cap that hinted at a past he didn't speak about. He didn't order a drink, didn't look for attention. He simply sat down and watched the game. But the bar's owner, a hot-headed man known for making snap judgments, didn't like the look of him. Maybe it was the calm in the man's eyes or the silence in his presence that felt threatening. Whatever the reason, the owner snapped, insulting the man, accusing him of acting superior, and finally kicking him out in front of the entire bar. What the owner didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the man he just humiliated was a decorated Navy SEAL. And the next day, when the door opened again, it wasn't just one man walking in, it was his entire SEAL team. And what followed was a lesson this bar and the entire town would never forget. It was a rainy Thursday night in a small town just outside San Diego. The kind of night when most people stayed in unless they had nowhere else to go. The streets glistened under the dim orange glow of streetlights, and puddles danced with ripples as tires splashed through them. Inside the rusty Anchor, however, it was business as usual. Neon signs buzzed softly above the bar, country rock played from the jukebox, and regulars filled the stools and booths like clockwork. Rick, the bar's owner, stood behind the counter wiping down glasses. A former Marine who never saw combat but loved to talk like he had. Rick ran the place with a strict sense of control. He prided himself on keeping things orderly, which often meant throwing people out for the slightest disruption. No politics, no debates, no drama, and above all, no one who challenged his authority directly or indirectly. That's when the door creaked open, and a man stepped in. He wasn't big or loud. He didn't storm in like he owned the place. He just walked with a kind of deliberate calm that made people glance twice without knowing why. He was dressed simply: worn boots, jeans that had seen better days, a dark hoodie, and a faded U.S. Navy cap pulled low over his brow. He walked straight to the bar and took a seat at the far end, away from the chatter. Rick noticed him immediately, mainly because the man didn't order a beer like everyone else. Instead, he looked Rick in the eyes and said, "Just a soda, please." Rick raised an eyebrow. Soda. Still, he poured it and slid it across the counter. The man nodded. Thanks. He didn't pull out a phone. He didn't try to talk to anyone. He just stared at the TV mounted on the wall, where a baseball game played quietly in the background. A few regulars glanced his way, then shrugged him off. But Rick kept watching. Something about this guy bothered him. A few seats over, a couple started arguing loudly. Clearly a few drinks in. Glasses clinked. Laughter rang out. Someone shouted at the screen when the Padres missed a play. But through it all, the man at the end of the bar didn't flinch, didn't move, didn't react. He just kept watching. Rick didn't like it. He leaned over the counter. "You here to start trouble?" The man looked up, calm and composed. "No, just watching the game." Rick's lip curled. "Funny, you sit there like you're watching over the whole place, wearing that Navy hat like we owe you something." There was a pause. The bar grew slightly quieter. A few heads turned. "I didn't ask for anything," the man said evenly. Rick snapped, louder this time. "We don't need your kind sitting here like you own the place. You ex-military types come in here like you're better than everyone else. Not tonight." The man didn't argue. He didn't even look angry. He just reached into his wallet, pulled out a $20 bill, and placed it gently on the counter. "Thanks anyway," he said, standing up. Rick scoffed. "Yeah, walk away. That's right. Go find someone else to impress." Without another word, the man turned and walked out into the rain. For a moment, the bar was silent. Then the music kicked back in and the crowd resumed their laughter and drinks. But not everyone forgot what just happened. A few regulars exchanged looks. One of the bartenders, a younger guy named Chris, muttered under his breath, "What was that about?" Rick ignored him. Outside, the man walked alone into the night. His footsteps quiet but firm. Nobody knew his name yet. Nobody knew what he'd seen, what he'd survived, or who he really was. But they were about to find out. Because that quiet exit wasn't the end of the story. It was the start of something far bigger. By morning, the sleepy little town wasn't so quiet anymore. The rain had stopped, but the storm was just beginning. Online, someone at the rusty Anchor had snapped a photo the night before. It showed Rick mid-rant, finger pointing at a calm man in a Navy cap, who stood quietly with his hands in his pockets. The picture was blurry, but the emotion was clear. The caption was simple and damning. Bar owner disrespects Navy SEAL. It was posted by a local on Facebook, then shared in a community group. Within hours it was all over social media. Veterans groups reposted. A military spouse from across the state commented, "This is why so many of our heroes suffer in silence." Others jumped in. "Disgraceful." One man wrote, "That bar needs to be shut down." Another posted, "Somebody find out who that SEAL is. We've got his." The town's online pages lit up with arguments. Some folks backed Rick, claiming he had the right to refuse service to anyone. Others said it didn't matter who the man was. He deserved respect. But amid all the noise, one thing became clear. Nobody actually knew the quiet man's name. Nobody knew for sure if he was a Navy SEAL. Nobody, that is, except for the people who'd served beside him. Rick, meanwhile, wasn't losing sleep. He stood behind the bar, sipping coffee and grumbling to anyone who'd listen. "It's social media drama," he scoffed. "People get their feelings hurt too easily these days. You think I'm scared of some Facebook warriors and their keyboards?" One of the bartenders, Chris, the same one who had watched the confrontation the night before, cleared his throat. "Still," he said carefully, "you might want to ease up. People are kinda upset, Rick." Rick snorted. "He's probably not even a real SEAL, or the hat for attention," and people fell for it. But around noon, something happened that no one could ignore. A black SUV pulled up and parked directly outside the Rusty Anchor. The engine idled for a moment before shutting off. Then the door opened, and a man stepped out, tall, square-jawed, with the kind of posture that made you stand up straighter just looking at it. He wore jeans, a plain black shirt, and on his chest a subtle trident pin gleamed in the sunlight. Nobody inside the bar noticed at first, until another SUV pulled up, then another, 3 vehicles, one after another. More men stepped out. They didn't walk like civilians. They moved with discipline, purposeful, alert, in sync. They didn't talk. They didn't need to. The silence said everything. Each one wore something that only the observant would notice. A subdued navy patch, a wristband with coordinates, a tattoo peeking from a rolled-up sleeve, little things that to the trained eye spoke volumes. The door to the bar swung open. The first man stepped inside. Rick looked up from behind the counter, his coffee cup halfway to his lips. The men entered in a single line, one after the other, forming a quiet wall of presence. As they moved toward the bar, no posturing, no bravado, just calm, controlled authority. The tall one, clearly the leader, spoke first, his voice low but firm. "Is the owner here?" Rick cleared his throat. "That's me. What can I do for you?" The man nodded once. "We're just here for a drink." Rick blinked. Yeah. Shh." He turned to pour something, but his hands suddenly didn't feel as steady as they usually did. These weren't guys looking to make a scene. They didn't have to. Their presence alone made the entire room feel different, heavier. Chris leaned in and whispered, "Rick, these guys, they're SEALs." Rick didn't respond. His face had gone pale. The leader sat down at the exact stool Jack had occupied the night before. Then he looked up and said quietly, "He's one of..." The bar went dead quiet the moment the door shut behind the last man. 10 of them stood inside the Rusty Anchor, lined up like ghosts from another world. Men molded by war, bonded by blood, and forged in places few dared to imagine. They weren't dressed to impress. No uniforms, no medals, just jeans, boots, t-shirts, and that unmistakable aura of men who had seen too much and said too little. One of them, taller than the rest, broad-shouldered with a scar slicing across his eyebrow, took a slow look around the room. His eyes were steady but sharp, scanning not for threats but for meaning. The other 9 stood silently behind him, their presence alone more commanding than 1,000 words. He stepped forward. "Is the owner here?" he asked, his tone calm but unshakable. Rick, who had been wiping a glass behind the bar with the same rag for the past 5 minutes, looked up. His fingers stopped moving. He swallowed. "I'm the owner," he said cautiously. "What's this about?" The tall SEAL didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He just gave the smallest, faintest smile. "Just came for a soda." Rick didn't respond at first. His eyes flicked to the others, then to the regulars, who were now deadly silent, phones out, eyes wide, unsure of what was unfolding. Then one by one, the SEALs walked forward and took seats at the bar. No fanfare, no intimidation, just quiet solidarity. They didn't order beers or shots. One asked for a water, another for a sweet tea, a few asked for soda. The clink of glasses and the hum of the cooler were the only sounds breaking the silence. They weren't there to start anything, but they also weren't there by accident. The regulars whispered to each other, confused and intrigued. A few began recording discreetly with their phone. One man muttered, "Is this about that guy last night? The quiet one?" Rick tried to compose himself. He forced a casual smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "If this is about yesterday, look, he didn't say he was military. How was I supposed to know?" The tall SEAL turned toward him, his expression unreadable. "Jack doesn't talk about himself," he said flatly. "That's kind of the point." Rick opened his mouth to reply but shut it again. There it was, Jack, the quiet man he'd thrown out. This wasn't just about some misunderstanding anymore. These men weren't here to fight, but their message was unmistakable. Jack wasn't alone, and suddenly everything changed. You could see it ripple through the bar like a shockwave. The waitress near the jukebox stopped pretending to wipe a table. One of the regulars stood up, visibly shaken. Chris, the young bartender, stepped back instinctively and muttered under his breath, "He really was one of them." Rick's bravado began to crack. "I didn't mean anything by it. He looked like he was judging people." The SEAL shook his head slowly. "Jack doesn't judge anyone. He watches. He listens. He's the kind of man who does what needs to be done, and never asks for thanks." A pause hung heavy in the air. "He's not the kind to announce he's a SEAL. That's why you never saw it come." The bar remained silent. No more laughter. No more background chatter. Just the weight of realization pressing down on every corner of the room. Rick looked around, realizing for the first time how outnumbered he was, not just by these men, but by the truth. The SEALs didn't stay long. They drank their sodas, paid in cash, and left quietly, just as they had come. No threats, no confrontation, just presence. A presence that said everything without saying a word. As they walked out, the tall one looked back at Rick. "You never know who you're talking to," he said simply, and then they were gone. But the silence they left behind, that lingered. By nightfall the town wasn't just talking, it was buzzing. And this time it wasn't about rumors. It was about a local reporter named Elise Crawford had been following the story since the picture of Jack and Rick went viral. She was young, tenacious, and respected for digging deeper than most. That afternoon, she managed to do what no one else had, track down Jack Reynolds. She didn't confront him. She didn't ambush him with a camera crew. Instead she asked around quietly, followed whispers, and finally found him sitting alone on a park bench, near the coast, watching the waves roll in. She approached with caution, introduced herself, and asked if she could tell his side of the story. Jack politely declined the interview, but something in his eyes must have moved her, because Elise didn't need his words to do her job. That night, her article went live. The Man Behind the Hat, the untold story of Jack Reynolds. It exploded. Turns out, Jack wasn't just a Navy SEAL. He was Lieutenant Commander Jack Reynolds, a man with more courage than most could imagine. Elise's article outlined it all. Jack had served for over 15 years in naval special warfare. He completed 3 combat deployments in the Middle East, led high-risk hostage rescues, and had personally saved 6 members of his unit during a brutal ambush in Kandahar. And for his actions, he was awarded the Silver Star and the Bronze Star with Valor, 2 of the highest honors given for bravery in combat. He had also earned the nickname Ghost Shield among his peers, not because he was invisible, but because when danger came, he was always the one standing between his team and the worst of it. He'd been wounded in action multiple times, but had returned each time until a spinal injury during a halo jump ended his active career. Jack had retired quietly 2 years ago. He moved to the quiet coastal town in search of peace. No parades, no headlines, no speech, and true to his nature, he had never once mentioned his past, not to his neighbors, not to the bar regulars, not even to the local VA. He wasn't hiding, he just didn't think it mattered. But now it did. Rick's phone buzzed non-stop that night. Angry voicemails, emails, texts. A local veterans group demanded an apology. The mayor's office issued a public statement of disappointment. Some of Rick's longtime customers canceled their tabs and unfollowed the bar's social media pages. One local brewery announced it would no longer do business with Rusty Anchor. Inside the bar, things were quiet, too quiet. Rick stood behind the counter staring at the article on his phone, his face pale. The words Silver Star and War Hero burned into his memory like hot iron. He tried to justify it to himself. How was I supposed to know? He didn't say anything, but deep down he knew. He hadn't asked. He judged, loudly. Meanwhile, Jack remained silent, just like always. He didn't speak to reporters. He didn't post online. He didn't gloat, until a news crew caught up with him outside a local coffee shop the next morning. The reporter, breathless, asked, "Mr. Reynolds, why didn't you say anything that night at the bar?" Jack paused, holding his coffee. The breeze tugged lightly at the brim of his navy cap. He gave a small shrug and said only this: "You shouldn't have to prove your worth to be treated with respect." That one sentence became the headline the next day, and the quote, it spread faster than the original story, printed, shared, tattooed, immortalized. A reminder that real heroes don't shout, they show up, quietly, honorably, and sometimes they wear worn boots, faded jeans, and a navy cap. The next morning, the windows of the Rusty Anchor were dark, no music blaring from the jukebox, no scent of fried food in the air, just a single handwritten sign taped to the glass door, "Closed until further notice." But it didn't matter. The damage was already done. In less than 24 hours, the bar's Yelp rating had nosedived from a solid 4. Review after review poured in, angry, disappointed, heartbroken, and not just from locals. People from across the country weighed in: veterans, active duty military, family members of service members, even strangers who had simply read the story and been moved by it. "This place disrespected a hero," one review read. "Never visiting this bar again." Another said, "My dad served, and this makes me sick." By the end of the week, the Rusty Anchor was no longer just a neighborhood watering hole. It had become a national symbol of what happens when arrogance meets humility, and loses. Meanwhile, something unexpected happened. Jack Reynolds didn't hide. He didn't retaliate. He didn't bask in the attention. Instead, he kept walking his usual route to the coffee shop, helping his elderly neighbor carry groceries, and sitting quietly on the same bench by the coast. But people began to notice him more now, not just for his story but for who he was. A week after the article dropped, Jack received an invitation to speak at the local high school for Veterans Day. At first he hesitated. Public speaking wasn't his thing, but the principal insisted. "The students should hear from someone like you," she said. Jack showed up in jeans and a collared shirt. No medals, no rank, just himself. He spoke softly, telling the students about service, sacrifice, and the power of listening. No war stories, no drama, just truth. At the end he looked at the auditorium and said, "Respect costs nothing, but it means everything." The room gave him a standing ovation. That phrase followed him. He was asked to repeat it again a week later at a local veterans event, then at a Navy fundraiser, and then at the request of the governor, at a statewide memorial service. Each time, Jack remained humble. He never made it about him. And the SEALs, they never returned to Rusty Anchor. That chapter was closed. But every Thursday night without fail, they met with Jack at a small no-frills diner 2 blocks away. The staff knew them by name. No press, no fanfare, just 10 brothers having dinner with the man who had once shielded them from bullets, and was now shielding them, once more, from a world that too often forgets. As for Rick, he was never seen much after the story broke. Whispers swirled around town. Some said he tried to post an apology on social media, but the comments buried it. Others said he tried reopening the bar, but no one came. Within a month he sold the Rusty Anchor. No public statement, no farewell drink, just packed up and left town, slipping away like a man who finally understood the weight of what he'd done. Locals say he was last seen in a truck headed east, tired, weathered, alone. But the building didn't stay closed for long. A new owner took over, a Navy veteran named Sarah Briggs. She kept the old brick walls but changed everything else. New furniture, new kitchen, new name. The Rusty Anchor became the commander's table, in honor of the quiet man who had walked in one rainy night, said almost nothing, and changed everything. And now, etched in bold letters just below the new sign, reads a phrase that no one in town will ever forget: "Veterans always welcome." In the end, this wasn't just a story about a bar, a misunderstanding, or even a group of elite soldiers. It was about dignity, about how the quietest people often carry the heaviest burdens, and how respect should never depend on appearances. Jack didn't seek revenge. His team didn't demand apology. They simply reminded the world of something we should never forget. Honor isn't worn on a sleeve. It's lived, quietly, every day. If this story moved you, share it, because somewhere out there, another Jack is walking through life unnoticed. And maybe, just maybe, your kindness is what makes the difference. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more powerful stories that remind us of the values that truly matter. Thanks for watching, and to all our veterans out there, thank you for your service.